one day, while I was just doing stuff around the house, I felt this nudge, an inner voice that said, hey, you've come through a lot of difficult stuff, okay? And you're fucking all areas. Don't you think it's time you share how you healed, how you woke up, and all the weird and wonderful shit that helped you to do it? And I was like, yeah, I guess it is. You're listening to the Spiritual Shitshow podcast with Suzanne Soul, episode 53. Hey, all you amazeballs people, and welcome to the Spiritual Shitshow podcast, where we get into the saga the healing and spiritual awakening journey can be. I'm your host, Suzanne Soul, comedian, lifelong spiritual student, and I'm sharing some of the tips and tricks I've learned along my journey that have helped me, and that I hope help you too. Okay, let's motherfucking talk about it, shall we? This is my 1-year motherfucking anniversary birthday of the Spiritual Shit Show with Suzanne Soul podcast. So happy 1-year birthday anniversary to the Spiritual Shit Show. Now 1 year older and a recipient of a 2025 Signal Awards Gold in Religion and Spirituality and Bronze in Comedians Shaping Culture. So, woohoo! That is super cool. So I dropped my first episode a year ago on October 29th, 2024, and I seriously cannot believe it's been a whole fucking year since I started this podcast already. I mean, technically I can because 12 months have gone by, but also, holy shit, time is wild and wacky, don't you know? Now, you might be like, hey girl, so what inspired you to get this podcast going in the first place? And then I would say, hey girl, listen. So first of all, one day while I was just doing stuff around the house, I felt this nudge, an inner voice that said, hey, you've come through a lot of difficult stuff, okay? And you're fucking all areas. Don't you think it's time you share how you healed, how you woke up, and all the weird and wonderful shit that helped you to do it? And I was like, yeah, I guess it is. So here we are. So today, in honor of 1 year of this shit show magic, I want to share some of my story, the story behind the Spiritual Shit Show with Suzanne Soul. Why I started this podcast, why I care so much about healing, awakening, and laughing through the madness, because I haven't really shared a lot about my own story here yet. I've shared pieces, I've shared shards, sparkly bits, but never sat down and said, here's why I am doing what I am doing. So today I'm sharing my story because I know there are people out there who've lived through similar shit shows or who are still living in them. And I want them to know there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I know that because I'm talking to you from it. Okay, now listen, babe. My total full-ass story will be told in the book I'm writing. But I wanted to share some of what I walked through to get to this point because it's where my healing and awakening journey began. Hence the podcast. I've carried this story for a long time, and I'm telling it now because I think it can help someone else. But also, I'm telling it for me, to claim it, to own it, and to share it fully in the book, stage, show, and whatever other way it wants to live in the world. Anyway, let's get into this shit show. So let's start at the beginning. Zoom in on a house in the Chicago suburbs. I grew up in a family where there was a big extended family all around us, where there was love and community and a lot of fun, and we're talking loud dinners, dancing, laughter, music. But there was also a part of my family that normalized violence as a normal part of family life, where violence was not unheard of, it was just what happened. It started hundreds of years ago and kept getting passed down generation to generation, like an ugly china set. My dad experienced violence growing up in his house, and then I experienced it growing up with him. And I want to say that families grow. My dad has changed a lot, and parents do what they know, and that is what my dad knew. Now, I'm not saying violence is okay because it's familiar. I'm just saying that that was the context. And I'm literally making this podcast from the guest room of a condo that my dad helped me buy. Life is complicated, full circle, and sometimes oddly poetic. And telling our truth is how we get to healing and freedom, and how we heal generational trauma and help each other out of the shadows and darkness of dysfunction and shame. Growing up in a home with violence meant I was scared all the time. And when you grow up in fear and experience violence from a parent, you believe you're the cause of it. And I did. And that belief shaped everything I understood about love, safety, power, and what it meant to be a human being and a woman. My mom was a woman of her time in the 70s and 80s when women weren't encouraged to speak up if there was violence in the home, especially in the suburbs. Her coping strategies were to either go totally quiet or hold on to my sister and myself for stability, which sometimes made it hard for us to individuate and be our own people so we could discover who we were. She could be thoughtful and kind, but she was known to hover. When my dad was home, I was on high alert. I was afraid about every word I said and every move I made. And sometimes when he was angry, he would say unkind things to me and call me selfish or say that I was no good. And those words were so painful to me. Those are the kind of words that mess with your head because after a while, you don't know what's true about you anymore. And you start to believe those things about yourself. And I did. So BT dubs, parents who are listening, when you say negative things to your kids out of anger, those words become their truth. They don't have life experience to have a different perspective. They just believe you. So be mindful with your words. They go deep into your child's mind and last a lifetime. And I know this isn't just my story. This is a lot of people's stories. There are a lot of people who grew up in families where pain was part of the furniture. And kids are geniuses at survival. You'll learn to hide behind a mask, to perform, to make people laugh, to deflect danger. And there are so many masks to choose from. The good girl, the nice boy, the overachiever. I became the funny girl. Humor was my armor. If I could make you laugh, maybe you wouldn't get mad at me. Maybe you'd like me. Maybe you wouldn't hurt me. Maybe you'd stay. And it worked. Sometimes, not always. But enough that I learned to survive by entertaining. On the outside, I was funny. On the inside, I was terrified. Living with pain, rage, shame, and a lot of self-hatred. In violent households, kids blame themselves just to try to have some illusion of control, saying things to themselves like, if it's my fault, maybe I can fix it. And so they think, if I could just be better, maybe they'd love me more. Or if I could just say the right thing, maybe they won't get mad. Or if I could just get it right, maybe they won't lose their temper. And that's the trap, because then as adults, those thoughts become coping strategies of perfectionism, people-pleasing, and a nervous system fried like carnival food. Because when you grow up walking on eggshells and scanning the room for safety all the time, it rewires your nervous system so that even when things are calm, your body doesn't believe it. Fear becomes anger. Anger becomes self-hatred. Because when you can't rage at the people who are hurting you, you turn it on yourself. And so the voice in my head said, it's your fault, Suzanne, because you're bad and you're broken. You're the reason people have a hard time loving you. And I believed that about myself. So I tried to be perfect, to be lovable, funny, compliant, anything to keep the peace. And when that didn't work, I acted out. But inside, I was deep in fear and pain. The hits and the slaps fade, but the nervous system remembers. Like the book says, the body keeps the score. And let's be real. So many of us are walking around with totally jacked up nervous systems. So that's how my shit show began. My parents divorced when I was 15 years old. And once my dad left, he never hit me again, which was a huge relief. But I also didn't see him as much, and that was its own heartbreak because as much as I wanted space from the fear, I still needed a steady dad presence in my life, so it was really confusing. My relationship with my dad remained complicated for many years as I tried to make sense of things, claim my voice and my life. My relationship with my mom had its own moments of complication as well, but I saw her more often, so it was different. And once my dad left, my mom was overwhelmed. She tried her best, but she was overwhelmed and afraid. And I was a teenager with a shredded nervous system and no idea who I was. And I hated myself so much, I honestly didn't think I deserved to live. And I expressed that self-hatred in my life. I was really hard on my little sister, and I was hard on my mom too. And at 16 years old, it all became too much for me, and I tried to end my life. But the second I took the handful of aspirin, I regretted it. I knew I wanted to live. So I asked my mom, what would happen if someone took a bunch of aspirin? And luckily, my mom realized what was happening and got me to the ER. And I survived, obviously, because here I am talking about shit shows on a microphone. So, yay. And to anyone who is listening, almost everyone who survives a suicide attempt says the same thing. I'm so glad I didn't die, and I wished I wouldn't have done it the second I did it. You don't actually want to die. You just want the pain to stop. And it can, through healing and time. So reach out for help and support. You will get there. I'm living proof. After that, I was required to go to therapy. I was 16, sitting in an office, learning what feelings even were. It was strange, but it was really helpful at the same time. But going back to school after that was brutal. I was so ashamed, convinced everyone thought I was crazy, even though they didn't know what happened or why I had been out of school. I just felt so unready to socialize that I ate lunch at a table by myself with my head down for weeks. My mask was gone, and I didn't know how to exist without it. Then one day, my dear friend Mickey was the only person to ask, "What's going on with you? You haven't been yourself." And I told him everything, what happened and how I felt like I was worth nothing and that I was garbage. He was bewildered by that, and he said to me, "You're one of the most talented and amazing people I know." And I just broke down because no one had ever reflected me back to myself like that before. That moment changed my life and made me feel like I could believe in myself. I mean, I'd always been performing school plays, dance recitals, living room shows that my parents were forced to watch while they were trying to watch TV. I mean, I was a total ham. My dad even called me that, which I thought was hilarious. And my parents would tell me I did a good job after recitals. I just had never been reflected back to myself in the way that my dear friend Mickey spoke to me that day. And I'll always be beyond grateful for that moment, because it changed the trajectory of my life. And speaking of house shows, as an aside, it totes cracks me up that I am now hosting a talk show style podcast, because as a kid, I literally made all the neighborhood kids come to my house so we could do a talk show in my basement, and I would be the host and I would interview them and we would do variety acts And my mom would donate her old clothes so we could have costumes. Honestly, she should have gotten a tax write-off for artistic support, if you ask me. Anyway, fast forward, because this is the Cliff Notes version. I go to college out of state. My mom drove and dropped me off, which I thought was a total act of faith and love. I was thrilled and terrified, and now responsible for my own emotional circus. I was a dancer, an artist, trying to find myself in a creative arts college. But then I fell into a deep depression mid-semester and I could barely get out of bed. I missed classes and I suffered deeply. I went to a community college until I could figure out what I was going to do. But art was always my solace, and it brought me a feeling of aliveness. The next year, I figured out how to be able to go to school to study music. I kept creating, even when I didn't know who I was, and my creativity always served me so well and brought me so much fulfillment, which was such a gift during difficult times. Then there were my adult romantic relationships, or as I like to call them, Suzanne's Shitshow +1. I was so wounded and confused, and I didn't know who I was or how to love. I craved love, but I feared it just as much. I didn't know how to love without disappearing or how to be loved without panicking. I was either clinging or running, and sometimes both in the same week, which probably was confusing for people. Sorry about that, everyone. I started struggling with addiction and alcoholism. I had started drinking and to excess sometimes and smoking pot in high school, but on my own, it started to amplify. And so did the chaos in my life. And by the time I was in my early 20s, I met a man who mirrored the violence I'd grown up with. But it all started off the total opposite, almost like a dream romance. He was charming, funny, perfect, too perfect actually. So idealistic, I probably should have questioned it. And he had a history of violence against women, which of course I didn't know about at first. But because our inner child parts are always trying to work out those early wounds that are living inside of us and running our lives, those parts can sense where similar situations are, where they could possibly get a redo or succeed at changing the outcome from the past. I had become a young woman whose agenda became trying to get a man to want to have me live with him and take care of me. To experience that kind of caring from a man became my obsession. So after dating only 6 months, we were moving in together. And then we started fighting. I was a mess. It was attachment wound trauma city. What had happened? Why had he changed? What had I done to make him stop treating me with love and kindness? And then we got in a really bad fight, and it got heated and ugly. And then he beat the shit out of me for the first time. And I blamed myself. But I stayed. And of course it got worse. More violence, more shame. And I hated myself more and more every day. But I was too afraid to leave. Because I believed him when he would say, "You'll never make it without me." I actually did leave a few times, but I would come back over and over and over again. And the cycle would start again. And anyone who's ever been in a domestic violent relationship knows how hard it is to break free. Not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. Because you're not just untangling from a person. You're untangling from this totally fucked up world you've been living in. And it's almost like when prisoners get institutionalized, it's hard for them to imagine living in the real world again. And I was too terrified to tell anyone. Like many women, I was too incredibly embarrassed and ashamed to admit I was letting someone beat me up. And worst of all, this is the worst part, actually. Deep down, I knew that if I told my friends, it would have to be over for good, because I wouldn't ever be able to go back if I wanted to. If you can believe that. If you can believe that. But eventually, because these things never end well, one night it got so violent that I feared for my life. We were in his garage, and a fight had escalated, and he was now strangling me, and I couldn't breathe, and I really thought I was going to die. So to defend myself, I kneed him in the you-know-whats, and then he threw me, and his minivan door happened to be open, and I fell into the van. And I just tried to search around with my hands to find something so I could defend myself and save my life. And I found a hammer. So I sat up, and I had the hammer in my hand, and he ran, and I jumped out of the van, and he jumped into the driver's seat of the van, which obviously had the keys in it, and he turned it on, and he backed out of the garage, and he drove away. And there I was, in the middle of the street, with a hammer raised in my hand. Then I experienced what can only be called divine intervention. Because all of a sudden, it was like a veil parted right before my eyes, and I saw myself from another plane of existence. And I saw how precious my life really was, and how I had been throwing my one precious life away to win the prize of love in all these crazy games my whole life. And in that moment, I saw and felt my own value and my own worth. And I let my arm fall and watched the hammer fall to the ground. And I knew in that moment, deep within myself, that I was done with this nightmare for good. And I turned around and I got in my car and I drove away, and I never went back. The pain undoing all of this was so deep. And so I found a therapist, one I'd actually looked up for us, and I went for myself. And it cracked me open. I had to unlearn everything I thought I knew about myself, about love, about life. I had to meet the little girl inside of me who was still begging to be chosen, and learn to choose and love her myself. Healing was not pretty. It was ugly crying, screaming into a pillow, and then sitting there with snot on my face saying, okay, I think I'm making progress. Therapy, spirituality, recovery, it all started there. Slowly, I found the performer again, the storyteller, the spiritual seeker. And I started exploring spirituality, New Thought, Buddhism, and listening to teachers like Ram Dass, Alan Watts, Wayne Dyer, Marianne Williamson. And when I first heard Reverend Dr. Michael Beckwith say, God isn't outside of you, God expresses through and as you, at the Agape International Spiritual Center in Los Angeles, my whole world shifted. And it was like I was finally hearing someone say what I'd always believed deep down inside of myself. And it also helped me see that I'd been chasing love outside of myself with other people, even with God. And I realized that it already was inside of me the whole time. That divine spark, that love, that self-love had always been right where I was. I just had to stop running away from it and run into it. Humor came back into my life, but as medicine. Spirituality has helped me make sense of my life and helped me transmute some of my most difficult experiences. I have grown. My relationships have grown. My relationships with my parents and family have grown. We've all grown. And then getting sober later on deepened everything. And I'll talk about my sobriety journey in another episode. And so the Spiritual Shitshow podcast was born as a space to be both holy and hilarious, for healing and being human. for using our voice and sharing in community. I have spent the last couple decades climbing out of a hole of suffering and pain with therapy, recovery, creativity, and laughter and divine collaboration, and I'm still climbing. But now I climb with more sass and self-love. This podcast is my way of saying, hey, I've been through the fire and made it to the other side. And I have healed, and I have found a deep well of wholeness and love within me that I can draw from right where I am. And you have that too. It's not perfect over here, but it's a gazillion times better than it used to be, and you can do it. And after everything I have lived through, I know this for certain. Love, real love, starts within. And it's not earned. It's realized. I tell this story for everyone who has been through or is going through some of the things that I have shared here, and to tell you that you can change your life and you can heal and you can become free and feel whole, and it can all come from your own journey of showing up for yourself. And the gift of that is feeling self-actualized in a way that could only come from that journey. And it is such a joy to be able to share my story and all the stories that I have shared on this show so far and will be sharing with all of you to help you know that you are not alone and you never have been. We all can get there together. We can heal. We can become whole together, telling our stories. And special thanks to my cousin Peter Mastrogiacomo, CEO of Grace and Sky Creative Agency in Philadelphia, who in April of 2024 said, why don't you come to Philly and record a few podcast episodes? There's a cool studio. We got all kinds of cool stuff. And he didn't even know that I already had the idea for this podcast and had started writing notes to prepare it. But that was the jumpstart it needed to really get into gear. And I filmed my first 4 guest episodes in Philly at Nova Light Studios in June of 2024. And once we did, Peter and his team generously helped me to get the show off the ground, having his editors edit those first 4 guest episodes, and then some more guest episodes I filmed in Chicago. And he encouraged me and guided me all along the way as I was getting going. And I needed it. The technology learning curve was a fucking bear, and it took me 4 months just to get it right. There were so many technical fails, and I must have filmed the first 4 episodes here in my guest room like 10 times each, at least. And as far as the content, I started out winging it at first, and I was just like not ready for prime time. I could barely talk into the microphone. I was so terrified to be sharing this side of myself, but I just kept going. And seriously, having the accountability of Peter and his team helped me not to give up on it. But I will tell you that that experience tested all of my resilience, and it grew me so very much. And here I am, 1 year in, so grateful for the journey so far, and so excited to share more stories with you. I have an incredible lineup of amazing guests who will be sharing their stories, their shit shows, their work, their ministry, their wisdom, and their insight. Here I am in the guest room, podcast studio, sitting in the condo my dad helped me buy in a total full circle moment, telling the story of where I've been and who I am becoming. So to everyone listening who's been through your own spiritual shit show, remember there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm talking to you from it. It don't ain't perfect here. And the shit shows will still occur, but there's shit show light now. Anyway, as always, this has been the Spiritual Shit Show podcast. My name is Suzanne Soul. Thank you so fucking much for listening. I love you so motherfucking much. And happy motherfucking 1 year anniversary birthday to the Spiritual Shit Show podcast. And I will see you on the next one. Roll it, motherfucker.